All right, so we've talked about what sex is meant to be biblically. We've talked about what the world says sex is supposed to be and how that's a violation of what the Bible says. Now let's talk a little bit about sex within marriage.
Yeah, let's get into that. Hi, I'm Andrea Warnock.
I'm Nathan Warnock.
And you've joined us for Marriage Monday on the Marriage by Design podcast. And this is a time where we get to talk to you about God's design for marriage, what the Bible has to say, and how we live that out practically.
That's right. So we're in the middle of what's going to go several more weeks of series talking about sex and sex-adjacent topics. So we've talked a bit about what the Bible says about sex, what sex is designed to be. We've talked about what the world says sex is, and I'll link to each of these videos if you're watching the videos. Otherwise, if you're listening on podcast, love you to go back. We took a break for the holiday to cover some other things, but now that we're back, love you to go back up a few Marriage Mondays and find those episodes. So today what we're going to talk about is, okay, you're a married couple, or if you're a single person and you've come across this video and you're just interested in knowing more about sex within marriage, love you to hang on with us. We're going to take a little bit of a look at a specific verse that Paul writes, and then a verse that Peter writes with regards to husbands. And I want to just talk about that over the next 15 or 20 minutes with regards to what that means for us as married couples and sex. Now, you may be watching this and going, well, how come this topic about sex only applies to married couples? And that's because on this podcast and biblically, the Bible's very clear that sex is designed to be between one man and one woman who are married.
Yeah. Sorry, my mind is rolling about something you said. If you're not married, I think it's really important, actually, to listen to this if you're not married, to understand what you're getting into if you choose to get married at some point, because the Bible talks a lot about what marriage is supposed to be, and sex is, of course, a big part of that, and you'll understand more as we talk in this, but God talks about what sex is supposed to look like within marriage in the Bible, and I think having a good understanding of kind of what the requirements are and how much and what you have to give of yourself to your husband, and what that's supposed to look like in a godly marriage is important for people who aren't married, because that's something that I did not understand and I had a warped view of heading into marriage.
Yeah.
And I wish that I had really understood that better, dealt with God a lot on that before we got married.
Yeah, I think you raise a good point on there. And, we're also going to talk about right here when we dig into 1 Corinthians and what Paul says, that, Paul's sort of default was, yeah, I would hope that you wouldn't be called to marriage,
right.
Which is a really interesting place to start. And in fact, Paul's not the only one that said that. Jesus himself in Matthew 19 said that exact thing. Mm-hmm. When the disciples, after listening to Jesus describe what sex was designed to be and how permanent and
marriage is designed to be.
Yes, what marriage is designed to be and how permanent it's designed to be, the disciples went to him and said, well, man, it'd be better for a man not to marry. And Jesus agrees with them, but he says, yet not everyone can do this, and you don't want to burn in lust.
Yep.
Right? So, look, for me, I don't have that calling on my life because Andrea's a babe and I want to be with her emotionally and physically, but I want to be with her sexually too. And apart from marrying her, there is no plan for God-honoring sex outside of marriage. So with that kind of lead in, I want to start with kind of our main text we're going to talk about today. It's in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, and I'm going to start in verse 1 and probably go through about verse 7. So here's how it starts. This is Paul. So all of Paul's letters, there's a transition point in them where he starts them out talking doctrinally, and then at some point, about God and these big views and Jesus and salvation and all that. And then at some point he transitions in his conversation to addressing practical things. And in this case, he comes right out and says it in verse 1. Now, concerning the matters about which you wrote, the church in Corinth had sent him a letter with a number of questions. It is good for a man not to have sexual relations with a woman. Period. That's the end of the quote. What do you think about that, babe?
That seems really odd.
It really does for someone that we know had a cherished view of marriage, because in Ephesians 5 we see him talking about the mystery of marriage and how it's a representation of God's desired relationship with the church. So
yet he wasn't married.
Right. Or clearly,
right.
As we're going to see here at this
right.
time, isn't
yes,
married
right.
at the very least.
But he did cherish that's a good word, the marriage relationship.
Yeah, the idea of
the
marriage.
covenant that God sets up within marriage.
Right, and at the same time, I think Paul recognized that most people weren't going to be able to abide by this. And in fact, we were designed as human beings to not all be that way. Because, spoiler, if we all lived as Paul did and abstained from sex as Paul says single people should, we would last for about a generation. And then that would be the end of humanity. So, of course, we're not all called to that. But Paul's saying it would be good for a man to not have sexual relationship with a woman, meaning it would be good for people to remain single. Well, why is that? Well, if you're a single person watching this right now, I want to encourage you, don't miss the unique opportunity that you have now. Because, yes, you may deal with some loneliness from time to time. Yes, you may see your friends around you getting married or having kids, or see on Facebook all of the things that the couples are getting to do with other couples. And I understand that. But don't miss this opportunity to be fully and completely married only to God. Because here's the thing Paul knew and Jesus knew. I pray for each and every single person watching this that you marry the most God-centered, God-loving individual on the planet. That person will still require and expect things from you as their spouse here on earth.
Sure, of course.
So the point is, what Paul realized is, but that's all a distraction from just living our lives serving the Lord. Now, it's a happy distraction, right? In many times, God uses our marriage. Certainly, Andrea and I, God has used our marriage. But all the time that Andrea and I spent focusing on our marriage and building our relationship and growing in intimacy, and on our children and on paying bills and on all the adulting couple things that we do, that's all time that we spend on each other that we're not spending directly serving the Lord.
Right.
Does that make sense? So it's certainly not that marriage is a sin, and I think this was the question,
or a bad
thing. It's a great thing. We talk about that all the time, but it is a distraction from just serving God.
Just like kids are a distraction from your marriage.
Right.
They're not a bad thing. It's not wrong that they are. They just are.
Right. That's one of my biggest counter arguments to the Dan Brown movement that happened a few years ago, where he wrote that book, The Da Vinci Code, basically making the supposition that Jesus and Mary Magdalene were married. And the book's been, it's fiction, right? And he tried to make it sound like it was based off of fact, and it's not. He twists the facts and whatever. It's an interesting study. But at the time, the question had come up in the church, well, does that matter if he was married or not? And that's a whole nother interesting thing that we'll do that on a live or something at some point. But my point was, Jesus himself says it'd be better to not be, which for me says He wasn't.
Right.
Because
He's always going to do the
because
best
Jesus
thing.
would always do the thing that is the most beneficial for his Father in heaven. That's and so anyway, all that to say, if you're single, be encouraged and make the most of this season. If you're not, then the question came up from the Corinthians of, well, but we're married. Should we not be having sex and just giving ourselves over to the Lord? And what Paul answers in 2 and on, I find interesting. He says, but because of the temptation to sexual immorality, each man should have his own wife, and each woman her own husband. The husband should give to his wife her conjugal rights, and likewise the wife to her husband. For the wife does not have authority over her own body, but the husband does. Likewise, the husband does not have authority over his own body, but the wife does. Do not deprive one another, except perhaps by agreement for a limited time, that you may devote yourselves to prayer. Then come together again, so that Satan may not tempt you because of your lack of self-control. See, Paul knew something about sex that it's important for us to recognize. You can't unsex once you start sexing.
Okay.
So, Paul's thing was, at the time, for a husband and wife who've come together and known each other sexually, you can't undo that. And so, rather than having people that have experienced sex and are just resisting coming together sexually just because, we want to try and live this strained, legalistic, holy life, what ends up happening is lust sneaks in and it's hidden, and then it grows and manifests itself in bizarre ways.
Such a distraction, too.
Right. And there's a number of statistics that show this in repressive world religions where sex is sort of this dirty thing that's hidden. It's not that sex goes away, even though that's what it may look like from outward appearance. It's that it goes underground and can really wreak havoc on the family and certainly the individuals. So what Paul's saying there is, you come together with your wife or your husband rather than just lusting after one another, which is a sin, by the way, right? Jesus says if you lust in your heart, it's the same as if you've had sex with that person. It was this higher calling Jesus gave. And so what he's saying is, rather than burn in lust, marry that girl, marry that guy, and then have all the sex you want to have, and that's great. In fact, not only should you have it, but actually the authority over your spouse's body is yours. This is a radical passage of Scripture as we think about sex now. This is probably one of the biggest passages where when we talk about this, people physically recoil in horror. Because we have convinced ourselves in 2021 that, and back 50 years, and I'm sure forward a lot more years, that I have complete autonomy over my sexuality. And this has ramped up over time to the point now where not only am I the one who says if and when I want to have sex, but I say if and when and what even sex I am. Because at the end of the day, I have autonomy over that. It's not what the Bible teaches. The Bible teaches that within marriage, your body and the responsibilities with regards to your body belong to your spouse.
Right. Yeah, so it says your body belongs to yourself, but also your spouse, not only to you, but to your spouse as well. And that's not again, that's kind of why another thing we should add to a premarital discussion to have. But that's why it's so important who you're marrying. Yeah. Because that person has authority over your body, and you give your sexual relationship and your body to that person. And so to be very careful about making sure that you're marrying somebody that God has called you to is important for so many reasons, but that's one too, because you have to have that, you want to marry somebody that you can trust to have the authority over your body sexually. Right.
Yeah, and it doesn't say to your wife, for husbands, to your wife in addition to you. It says just you, just your wife. That's who gets authority.
So it
over your
says
body.
in verse 4, the wife's body does not belong to her alone, but also to her husband.
Oh,
then,
this is what translation is that?
I don't know. And then in the same way, the husband's body does not belong to him alone, but also to his wife.
Oh, I would argue. So here's what mine says, and tell me if this is not something different. For the wife does not have authority over her body, her husband does.
Oh.
Likewise, the husband does not have authority over his body, but his wife does.
So maybe it's a deeper dive into...
Really interesting.
Yeah.
The point is that I'm right. So, no. I mean,
it doesn't make sense because you're to be one in marriage, and if you both have authority, it's a oneness authority.
That's right.
Whether either translation really doesn't matter.
Well, so here's what I think the point is. What Paul's saying here is, when you give yourself over to your spouse, that's what you're doing. You're giving yourself to your spouse. And this was really what I wanted to spend just a few minutes here talking about is, wives, this can be a difficult thing, particularly for women who struggle in the area of physical intimacy. And I know that there's a lot of you out there that it's really a struggle to give yourselves over to your husband. And it could be that you feel like, oh man, his sexual drive is just so much exceeds mine, and he wants to try things that maybe I don't necessarily love trying, that are not outside no, I'm not talking about three-ways or watching porn or any of that kind of stuff. I'm talking about things that God-honoring sexual things, but maybe you're just like, I don't, by the way. Right, and we'll talk about that next week actually. But my point is that this is the command. And guys, I'm going to get to you in a minute. So before you do the happy dance, just calm down a second. But wives, this is a challenge for you. And it's something that, babe, I'd love for you to maybe share how you handle this, because you and I are this. I mean, this is true life tales of Nathan and Andrea. You have a sex drive that's very different than mine. And you have sexual things in your past that really, I think, at a core level, hindered what you think about sex as a thing.
Right.
And so, how do you look at this, and what encouragement will you give to women that are going, are you serious that I have to give myself completely over to my husband?
Yeah. So I have some sexual abuse in my past, and a drive that's, like Nathan said, different than his.
Less than, I mean, just to be clear, so people understand, less than mine.
Jeez.
Sorry.
No, it is.
Well, I'm trying to be clear.
He knows I don't care. It's less than his, and yeah, I have definitely in the past struggled with a lot of warped thinking about sex, and so for us, I feel like our sexual relationship is always on a journey. And actually that's a really exciting thing, because we have our whole lives to work that out, and we have our whole marriage to continue to work on it. We've never come to a point where we feel like we've arrived, we have a perfect sexual relationship.
Right.
But it's also been a very long time where we feel like, oh my gosh, this is a terrible sexual relationship.
It's been a long time since then.
Yes.
Yeah. Since meaning we left that behind.
Yes.
Not like we've been thinking about that for a long time.
Yeah.
No, it was that way in our relationship for a long time, and that changed. And it's been a long time that we've left that behind.
And I think a lot of that is because we have come to a better understanding of my body is in the authority of my spouse. My body is my spouse's. But also because we see it as, this is just a journey, and it's okay that we haven't perfected this.
Right.
And we're always, it's exciting to feel like we can work on this.
Right.
So that's some of it. Getting help for past sexual abuse was vital, and again, that's always a journey too. Sometimes that's like, yeah, I'm doing good with that, and sometimes it's a struggle, and just recognizing it's for me, it's probably going to come up over and over throughout my whole life, and and I'll deal with it again, but I don't want it to be something that I don't work on with the Lord, or work on through processing, with the Holy Spirit's healing, and just allow that to then wreak havoc on our lives sexually. So there's that. As far as the different sexual drive than Nathan, that can be hard, but there's a loving give and take when you both realize you have authority over each other's bodies, and when you're putting the other one first above your own desires. If Nathan's doing that for me and I'm doing that for him, we work it out.
Right.
Nathan would, I'm just being honest, Nathan would probably have sex 3 times a day every day for the rest of his life. I don't know that I could mentally, emotionally, and physically do that. And Nathan knows that too.
Sure.
So there's a give and take, and there's a preferring the other person that we are just constantly on a journey of.
Right.
And there's different phases of life with pregnancies and nursing and little kids and all that too, that change things as well. But really asking the Lord to change my heart on it, and to also give me a desire for my husband, and give me not only give me the desire, but give me understanding of his needs. Give me understanding of his desire for relationship, and including sexually. So
right.
Having a heart of I want to be what my husband needs from me, and seeking that has been really important for me.
Yeah, and that's a good transition as you talked about the give and take that you and I have sort of found in our marriage, to transition to talking a little bit to guys. I'm awfully tired of hearing from guys who want to tell me about how they would die for their wife, and that's a proof of their love, because men are created with the ability to dissociate ourselves from death enough that there are a lot of things that men would die for. And I'm just speaking psychologically, this is a proven thing. This is why, as far back as time, men have volunteered to go to war in significantly, exceedingly higher numbers than women, because there's something about the way God made us as men, that we're willing to pay the ultimate price for something that's valuable for us. Here's the problem. You're telling me about how you'd be willing to die for your wife, but you're not willing to do the little things that are meaningful to her in the day-to-day walk. And the problem is, you're killing her and you're killing your relationship, because the only standard you have for whether or not you're giving your body to your wife is whether or not you'd be willing to take a bullet for her if a burglar showed up at your home. That's not a standard of giving your body over to your spouse. In fact, almost every spouse I've ever known wouldn't be that touched by you doing that, because they've got to pick up the pieces once you're gone, right? And I don't mean that they wouldn't appreciate you sacrificing your life so they could live. I'm sure that would be a romantic ideal for a time. But my point is that giving your body over to your spouse, right? I mean, you imagine if your spouse was if you have a higher sexual drive as guys, and not all guys do, but oftentimes that's what we see. If I went to Andrea and I was like, hey babe, I feel like I'm really struggling in our sex life. Could we try and have sex more often? And she was like, babe, I'd take a bullet for you. Well, I'm not.
I want sex.
Right, I'm not really that interested in that. Unless we're talking in metaphors, and I guess then. But otherwise, I don't really want that. Right? I mean, that's how it is. Right? I mean, it doesn't tell your spouse that you're giving your body over to her when what she wants is you to take out the trash, or put your laundry where it belongs, or take charge in getting the kids bathed and teeth brushed and ready for bed. That's how we as men give ourselves over to our wife, right? Look, we've talked about this on this channel before. Women are better at running the home. right? Feel free to waste your time by telling me about the exception of the one person you knew that wasn't the case. But by and large, women are better at running the home than men are. So how do you give your body over to your spouse? By allowing her to direct you in the things she needs done as she's caring for the home. Right? So when we give authority over our bodies over to our spouse, oftentimes that looks like our spouse, our wives, directing traffic and us not being a dick about it. I mean, that's oftentimes how that looks. And here's...
Or maybe it is in the bedroom.
Absolutely, right? It could very well be that you've fallen in a rut where you grab this, honk this, and do this, and that's the end of it. And it's been that way for a long time, and your wife's sort of dropping the hints of, well, maybe if you did this, or maybe could you not do this for a period of like ever, or whatever. And I'm trying to make it funny because we've all been, I mean, this is a reality of married life, but I've been in that position before, no pun intended. And so it can, as guys, for us look like, hey, I gotta figure something else out. I gotta step my game up because this is getting stale.
Right.
And so all those things, the point is, your body's not yours. That's what we keep trying to come back to, is it isn't yours. It's hers, or hers is his.
And we want to be clear, too, that doesn't mean that you just jump into, hey, I know my wife doesn't want to do this, but her body's mine, so we're going to do it. That's That's not okay either, because that's putting your desires above, as a priority above your relationship.
Yeah. Can I read something about that? So I'm going to flip over to 1 Peter 3. Husbands, I need you to understand how serious this is, because if you go looking for a verse where it says this with regards to your wives, you won't find it. This is unique to us as husbands. Peter writes in chapter 3, verse 7, he says, likewise, husbands, live with your wives in an understanding way, showing honor to the woman as the weaker vessel, since they are heirs with you of the grace of life. And this is the part I need you to tattoo on yourself, so that your prayers may not be hindered. Right? This is the kind way of Peter relaying from the Holy Spirit the truth. So let me say it the way that it could be said. If you're not loving your spouse and living with her in a way where you're pursuing and understanding who she is as a woman and seeking her in that area, God's not going to listen to you. Period. So are you wondering why you've been praying for that buddy of yours and to come to the Lord and there doesn't seem to be any movement there, or why you've been praying and praying for healing of someone in your family who has cancer or whatever, and why they're not getting better? Could I just submit that maybe, not guaranteed, but maybe it's because God's not listening to you because you're not living with your wife in a way that's loving and understanding. That's a reality. There's only 2 spots in the Bible where God says, if you don't do this, I won't listen to you. That's one of them. So husbands, for us, man, we've got to be invested in living with our wives in an understanding way and showing honor to our wives as the woman that she was created by God to be. So if you're doing that stuff Andrea is talking about, don't bother praying because he's not listening.
Yeah, and it's vice versa too. If a wife is saying, my husband's body's my own, so I get to do whatever that he doesn't want to do or isn't comfortable with, that it's just not right. But because you should be trying to live in an understanding way and also be giving your bodies to your spouses, you maybe need to open up your repertoire and be willing to slowly move into things that right now may feel uncomfortable, but you could maybe try something out that's new and see what you think. And again, you have your whole lives to explore your sexuality, so it doesn't have to all happen right now, and maybe you need to take really slow steps, and that looks like, hey, let's try this time. That's like a slow step, see how it goes. Maybe I need some time to get used to that. Maybe I say, whoa, I did not like that at all. I can't ever do that again. And, I would suggest then that your husband pray about his desire for that, you pray about your desire for that, and then maybe at some point try it again.
Yep.
But that's the beauty of marriage, is that a godly marriage is that you have your whole lives to create this journey, and it doesn't need to all be what you say, touched, honked, and put there the same way each time, because you can create a new experience each time and explore different things, but you have to be willing to give of yourself in a way that maybe you think is uncomfortable, maybe feels uncomfortable, but it's, we can go slow and discover each other together, and that's a beautiful thing of marriage.
Right. Yeah, and don't be afraid to talk about it after the fact. Right?
Yes.
I mean, that's a big piece. I mean, right after you're done is a good time to talk about how that went and what your spouse liked and didn't like, because for the most part the endorphins are going and all that, and it's a time when you're not least likely to probably fight about that.
Yep.
So, all right, guys, Andrea hinted on it, but I want to directly say it. You may be watching this and going, okay, well, what can or can't we do as married couples? We're going to talk about that next week on Marriage Monday. We wanted to set up first just the understanding of what God says about whose body belongs to whom. And then next week we're going to talk about, great, you're married. Here's what we can do and can't do. We're gonna keep it PG-13. Because I want it to be honoring to the Lord. So there will be a considerable amount of focus on things that you cannot do within marriage and why. I love the way you just said that. Yeah. Other than these 2 or 3 things, pretty much everything else is up to you and your spouse.
That's probably a shock to that. Maybe that's a shock to a lot of people.
Yeah.
There's very few things that you can't do.
Right. Yep. That's true.
God honoring.
All right, guys, thank you so much for joining us. Hope you had a wonderful Christmas last weekend. Hope you have a wonderful time. Looking forward to New Year's here at the end of the week. We will be coming out with a Family Friday later this week. It will probably be our Christmas card like we did last year. So shorter, kind of more scripted Family Friday where we just share a little bit about our year and have everybody updated on how our family's doing.
Yep.
Until then, guys, thank you so much for joining us. And remember, God is for your marriage. Have a great week.
Hey, thanks for joining us on Marriage by Design. If you were impacted by this video, like it by hitting the thumbs up below. Also, don't forget to subscribe, and once you subscribe, hit the bell icon so you can be notified when new episodes release.
Excellent. Also, one of the huge pillars of our show is interactivity between us and you. So we would love you to comment down in the comments below if you have thoughts about this video, or if you have questions or other things you'd like to see considered in the future. In addition, if you'd like, you can email us. That's marriagebydesignpodcast@gmail.com. We're also on Instagram @marriagebydesignpodcast, or you can find us on Facebook by searching Marriage by Design Podcast. Finally, if you want to, you can tweet at us. We do have a Twitter account that is @MarriageXDesign. Thanks, and have a great day.